Welcome to Defiant Nation Radio, where we defy the narrative that our culture is feeding us. We defy the idea that the scriptures cannot be trusted, and we defy the idea that the God of the Bible does not exist. We defy the idea that we have evolved from monkeys. At Defiant Nation Radio, we uphold the solas of the Reformation. We uphold the scriptures. We believe that salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. Defiant Nation Radio is the podcast ministry of EternityAtStake.com.
Welcome to Defiant Nation Radio. We're going to dive into critical race theory today. There is never enough time. Right now, I'm just at a loss for time. It seems like I'm running a couple days behind. If I could find a couple extra days in my week, that would really help things out. But I know we all struggle with that. It seems like becoming an adult. I saw the other day somebody said something about becoming adult. Seems like you just continually say, well, you know, we've gotten through this busy season, we've gotten through this busy thing, and so now we should slow down. But things never slow down. They never stop, and so we continue on. I got to preach last Sunday at my church, which was awesome. Preached on Colossians 1 verses 18 through 20, which was actually the second stanza of an early hymn of the church that there's debate, struggle trying to figure out if Paul wrote the hymn or if the church already had the hymn. Maybe Paul added words to it, but pointing to Christ and the main themes of creation and redemption arching through that hymn. And so it was a great time, but with working full time and putting everything together, and we're trying to build a tree house with the kids right now, and man, there's just not enough time in a day. But anyways, I'm sure you guys are dealing with the exact same issues all the time and know what that feels like. But today, last time I said that I would talk a little bit more about critical race theory, and to help us understand why is it a big deal? Why is critical race theory a big deal? What is intersectionality? Why is it a big deal? I won't have time to get into intersectionality today. If you listened through the series on social justice by the Founders Ministry, and you listened to those things in there, they dealt with some of these issues: critical race theory, intersectionality. What are those things? I'll deal with intersectionality in another talk, another series that I do. But again, I want to bring this stuff out, and I want to put it into a format that people can listen to. Probably you're listening to this. I don't know how many are actually watching this. So it's a podcast or a vlog or whatever you want to call it. But I wanted to make it so that you could listen to it, because so many people, we have such little time, right? And I know that I listen to a lot of things. I'm listening to sermons. I'm listening to talks. I'm listening to books. I drive very far every day to and from work. And so I do a lot of listening. I do tons of reading, but I do a lot of listening as well. And so I want to give this to you, and I realize that the format may be a little bit hard while I'm reading some of the articles or reading some of the definitions. I apologize for that. I want to try and start putting these on the website as articles with the links in them, so that you can link to them easier, come back and find them easier as you need the research. A lot of times you don't have to have this research up front. You're just being introduced to topics or whatever. And it's not until you're in a conversation with somebody or you need to help explain something to somebody that you need the documentation. And so I want to provide that, so it's not just in a listening format, but also in a format that you can actually come back and study and look at. And so hopefully I'll have this up on the website in the next week or two in an article form, and you can pop through the links and check them out and have that verification there, because this is critical information. When you're talking to somebody, they oftentimes want to see information if they're serious about the topic. So hopefully we can find that. But as we're talking about this, and we're talking about race, and we're talking about oppression and things like that, as Christians, we should always be standing in the place that we realize, Acts 17:11, all nations are of one blood. Again, I love what Answers in Genesis has done with Ken Ham and Pastor Charles Ware, Dr. Charles Ware. and helping us to understand that all nations are of one blood. I wanted to read from Revelation 7, where it talks about John seeing the kind of in the throne room, around the throne of God, sees the four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds, sees other angels there interacting, hears the number that are sealed on the earth, 144,000. And then he says, verse 9, after these I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying with a loud voice, saying, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. And obviously, all through the scriptures, we read that God is the God of all nations. We see that Christ came to save people from every tongue, tribe, and nation. And so as Christians, we can never, ever allow racism into our hearts, into our minds. We must stop that. We must squash that. Should that ever arise in our churches, we should be very aware of that. We should be welcoming of every tribe, tongue, and nation. And so when we talk about these issues, we have to understand that oftentimes one side of the conversation may carry a whole different set of feelings and emotions attached to this idea. Perhaps it's an African American person who has maybe come through many struggles. Maybe it's a white person who has bought into some of these lies that have been told by the critical race theory people, by their progenitors. You go from Karl Marx up through we even went back last time, talked about some of the philosophers and the philosophy that is behind Marx and all these things. And the ultimate goal is to destroy and pull apart. It's not to fix, it's not to remedy. And so that's why these things are so devious, because they claim that they are to fix and to remedy. That's not their purpose. Their purpose is to destroy and pull things apart. The idea then is that the world, that people can be made back into a better image without the God of the Scriptures, can be made into the image of the collective, the socialist hive mind, whatever you want to call it. If you're a Trekkie fan, the Borg, right? But we have to understand what we're talking about, realize that this can be a conversation that's loaded with passion and emotion, and we need to lovingly and carefully lay out the ideas that we're talking about. And so always approaching it gingerly, but with truth. We cannot avoid truth as we talk about homosexuality and all the LGBTQ stuff. We cannot avoid these things. And I'm going to read some authors that should cause us to pause as they're speaking as Christians. They're speaking, for the Gospel Coalition. They're being promoted at SBC seminaries. They're all over the place. But things that should cause us to pause and examine what they're saying and say, this is not right. There's something wrong here. And so, all through and under the guise of critical race theory, social justice, intersectionality, what have you. But I want to start by talking about the recent SBC convention. I think it was held in June of 2019. And to help us kind of break into this idea of what's going on, there's a resolution that was submitted, Resolution 9. I don't remember how many were ultimately submitted, like 20 or 25 or something like that. But Resolution 9, anybody can submit a resolution. People have said, well, why don't you go into the SBC convention? You can go as a messenger, and you can get up. Everybody gets so many minutes, 15 minutes or something like that, and you can lay it out. Hey, this is what we need to do. And so there's a board at the SBC convention that fields these questions, that fields these resolutions, and they will reword them a little bit, kind of fix the wording or whatever, so it's more clear, whatever. But Resolution 9 was very interesting because it was completely destroyed. The original intent was destroyed and made into and acceptance of critical race theory and intersectionality. And let me read a little bit, give you a little bit of what went on, what transpired, and what came out of it. So Resolution 9 was submitted by Pastor Feinstein, and it warned against critical race theory. And like I said, the board ultimately modified the resolution. But the original resolution was Al Mohler. Thankfully, Al Mohler called Pastor Tom Ascol, who was part of the founders, one of the founders of the Founders Ministry, and alerted him to this and asked him to take a look and make some of the needed revisions, to make it smooth, make it understandable. And I don't think Pastor Feinstein's original submitted was, completely unreadable or anything, but you can, and Tom Ascol writes about it on his website, founders.org, under Resolution 9, the Southern Baptist Convention. The Baptist Message writes about it on their, let me get to the name of the website. On baptistmessage.com. SBC resolutions include approval of Marxist theories. You can read about it there. He was asked to look at it by Al Mohler, which is awesome. But this is the thing with Al Mohler. We got just these seemingly cracks flowing through some things, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. I'll explain it, lay it out. So on one hand, he's asking Tom Ascol to look at this, reword it, help kind of edit it a little bit. So here's what Tom Ascol and a couple other guys came up with in 45 minutes. Okay, so this is the kind of edited version that they submitted. So it says, the new thing submitted says, whereas critical race theory and intersectionality are godless ideologies that are indebted to radical feminism and postmodernism and neo-Marxism, and resolved that we remind Southern Baptists that critical race theory and intersectionality emerge from a secular worldview and are rooted in ideologies that are incompatible with Christianity, and be it further resolved that we repudiate all forms of identity politics and any ideology that establishes human identity and anything other than divine creation in the image of God, and for all redeemed humanity our common identity together eternally united to Christ. And it goes on, be it further. So you get the main gist of it. Hey, critical race theory, intersectionality, bad. Let's be aware of it. Support scriptural teaching on these ideas of race and gender. The SBC board writes back to Tom Ascol and said this. It says, it is our aspiration in this resolution simply to say that critical race theory and intersectionality are simply analytical tools. They are meant to be used as tools, not as a worldview. And basically that's how Resolution 9 ended up. Hey, we want you to know the resolution is that critical race theory and intersectionality are simply analytical tools. I don't have the final wording of it pulled up here in front of me. You can go check that out yourself, but that's Resolution 9. So we go from this repudiation of critical race theory that really says very little about it. I mean, obviously you could write volumes about this stuff. And it comes back that, hey, these are tools that you can use for analysis. And you're just kind of scratching your head going, what in the world? And so Tom Ascol says in his article on founders.org, he says that aspiration was successfully realized. That is precisely what the adopted resolution says, but the reality is that neither critical race theory nor intersectionality are simply tools. They are indeed ideologies that have arisen out of neo-Marxist postmodern worldviews and are used by many to promote those worldviews today. The fact that it is called critical race theory indicates it is not simply a tool of analysis. These are things that make claims about whole systems, whole worldviews, critical race theory, intersectionality. He says, do they contain certain insights that are true and helpful? Yeah, I mean, there might be some insights in there. But overall, this is a problem, and this is exactly what people are saying. SBC pastors and people are saying about all this stuff, and then to have the whole resolution completely rewritten and made out to be an acceptance of critical race theory and intersectionality as tools. It just blows the mind. But it shows the trend that people keep pointing out. It underlies that trend and shows the danger that has crept into the Southern Baptist Convention, and I would argue the church at large. Now, why is it important to know what critical race theory is? Well, it's a part of social justice. It's a key part, and it's used to dismantle, right? That's where the word critical comes in from. It like I said, it destroys things. It dismantles things. Supposedly, implies that it's dismantling a system that is oppressing others, and more specifically, the oppression of others by white people, whether that be real or perceived. So you can imagine how this is being used in America today to supposedly dismantle racism. And so it's sometime I'll do a little series or one thing on, African Americans, especially in that time, the time that Cone is writing. These guys are writing, these Marxists that are writing and coming up with this stuff based on Karl Marx's theories. They're talking about how America is leaving its racism. They are coming out of it, and this is all across the nation. And again, this is where I really point to The Big Lie with Dinesh D'Souza's book. Phenomenal. Listen to him talking on college campuses, the questions that he fields, talking about the racism, where it was, who was holding those views. We have to be informed on the whole gamut. No problem with listening to both sides, right? But understanding. And in my mind, when you watch debates, you hear the most sentient points come out, or should be the best arguments for these things. And man, over and over again, I hear, Thomas Sowell and Larry Elder and these guys just demolish these ideas that racism is rampant through our country or rampant through the church. And anyways, I'll give you some specific quotes and things from them at some time and at some point and point you to their videos. But let's get some definitions of critical race theory so we can understand it a little bit better. In the Baptist Message, they talk about the theories come from two radicals. They say they know critical race theory is traced to the Harvard Law School and the founding theorist Derek Bell, who insists that the law perpetuates white supremacy and white privilege. And meanwhile, intersectionality is tied to the UCLA School of Law and Kimberly Crenshaw, the pioneer of the concept, who developed this abstract idea to explain, for instance, how the intersection of maleness and whiteness results in oppression against women of color. Now understand, slavery has existed we'll just say all through history. I mean, it's existed all through history. It still exists today. And it wasn't until the church, Christians, rose up and stood up against slavery that it began to stop in the West. It didn't stop in the East. It didn't stop in a number of other areas with Islam. It continued on. Look back at Thomas Jefferson and what he was dealing with the Barbary pirates and things like that. So the slavery has existed. Blacks have owned blacks, blacks have owned whites, whites have owned blacks. I mean, every color has enslaved every other color. And to act like this is purely a white thing shows on some part the desire to cover up the idea that racism, that slavery has existed all through history and all the different colors of the skin. And it shows a lack of knowledge on the part of people that will hold to that. And so we're trying to, we need to obviously understand ourselves, inform ourselves, but we also need to help others understand what it is. Another definition from the Encyclopedia Britannica talking about critical race theory, it's the view that race, instead of being biologically grounded and natural, is socially constructed, and that race, as a socially constructed concept, functions as a means to maintain the interests of the white population that constructed it. According to critical race theory, racial inequality emerges from the social, economic, and legal differences that white people create between races to maintain elite white interest in labor markets and politics, and as such create the circumstances that give rise to poverty and criminality in many minority communities. Though the intellectual origins of the movement go back much further, the critical race theory movement officially organized itself in July of 1989. Yeah. So that's a big, long definition. You can track through that. It's the white man's fault. I mean, long and short of it, it's the white man's fault, and he is still trying to hold people down. Not that there's no admission that things have changed, that things have broken, that our society in the West has gotten better, and ran, whatever you want to call it, away from slavery. No acknowledgement of that. It is, again, it's being used to destroy the West founded on the scriptures. The term capitalism is used, the term West is used. The goal is to destroy the society founded on the scriptures. It's not to fix anything, it's to destroy the society founded on the scriptures and rebuild it into the socialist utopia that they claim will exist. Horkheimer notes in 1972 that critical race theory in the narrow sense designates several generations of German philosophers and social theorists in the Western European Marxist tradition known as the Frankfurt School. According to these theorists, a critical theory may be distinguished from a traditional theory according to a specific practical purpose. A theory is critical to the extent that it seeks human emancipation from slavery and acts as a liberating influence. Critical race theory identifies the primary dichotomy in life as oppressor and oppressed. It has been applied to gender, to sexuality, to race, and even to colonialism. It has given us the fields of queer theory, post-colonialism, and whiteness studies, among others. These are not just fields of study at secular universities. They are the latest and greatest in the world of Christian theology. Now, that was from an article by Rod Dreher, talking about one of the students at one of the universities he's interacting with. You can find the article on theamericanconservative.com. It's called Seminary Confidential Critical Theory. Again, I'll have that posted on the website here in a couple weeks. But critical race theory supposedly seeks to correct perceived social injustices. Perceived is a big word there, right? It's full of emotion. Christianity, though, seeks to bring glory to the Lord, right? When we preach the gospel, we're not seeking to preach to a specific race. We may be with a specific race, but the gospel is not for one, well, because we are all one race, right? It's for the human race. It's not for one group of people. It's not for one ethnic group of people. It's for all people. And we all come together under the same Christ, under the same Lord. He is Lord over all of us. And so our love for each other, our care for each other, our interaction of the body of Christ for each other should exist, and that should drive away any racism issues, any hatred, anything that may exist there. Our good works are to glorify the Father in heaven, Matthew 5, so they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Our good works, we understand, flow out of our salvation, Ephesians 2, 8 through 10. We are created to do good works. We're created in Christ to do good works. There's no doubt that social injustices will always exist. But the question needs to be asked: who decides what is an injustice, and by what standard should it be fixed? We can always be going to the scriptures, right, and saying, hey, how should I be treating my fellow human, this guy, this girl, this person I work with? I mean, interpersonal relationships is a big deal. The scriptures speak volumes about that, right? The drive of the church, our goal, our mission is to preach the gospel, to preach Christ and Him crucified, right? When we stop doing that and add anything to it, we add, hey, the church is supposed to be doing, following critical race theory, dealing with intersectionality. And last time I think I talked about, the points you get for being however many things you can add up, so if you're not a white male, so maybe you're black, lesbian, whatever. You just add those up and you get more and more points. And so the whiter you are, the fewer points you have. If you're a male, you have no points, whatever. But so there's all these just made up rules that are created to destroy society, created to bring things down rather than to build things up as Christ will do in the redeemed person's life. Very critical. We can't change. So yes, we can work with. I love Ben Shapiro is in a debate with a couple of. I'll have to post a video. I don't remember where they were from, but they were very outspoken. One of them might have been from Black Lives Matter, and anyways, they were like, Ben Shapiro's like, where are the laws that are unjust right now for black people, for Hispanics, for sexually LGBTQ crowd? Where are those laws? He said, I will lock arms with you right now, and we'll go and we'll fix those laws. And in that debate, they just kept saying, well, there must be racism. There must be racism. There just has to be racism. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are racist people out there, but it's not systemic right now. It's not something that's being promoted. And when it is, the KKK or whatever, we excoriate that. We decry that, right? When we ask the question, who decides what is an injustice and by what standard should it be fixed? We have to recognize that the critical race theorists and those believing in intersectionality are pointing to socialism. They are pointing to the government as being God. Now, they may not come out and say that. They may hide it with a bunch of words. I think that's what Russell Moore is doing at the head of the ERLC. I believe he is has been given over to Christian Marxism. Brandon House calls it Marxianity, whatever you want to call it. He's there. He's working with George Soros. He's all about a one world government. He's all about open borders. He's all about critical race theory. And this joining hands with these antichrist philosophies, these antichrist people, should cause us to step back and say, wait a minute, what is going on? Another note that I've been hearing from a great point that I've been hearing from a number of commentators is, as a church, big C, right, this is being dealt with on a grand scale, especially in the West. In America, Europe's churches are a mess, farther down the road, down the hole than American churches are, but we're headed that way, right? It should be noted that these issues are not being pushed by the churches, by the thousands, by the millions of churches that are around the world. These are not being pushed by the churches. Rather, they're being pushed by parachurch organizations. Parachurch is an organization that is outside of the church. They are not accountable to a pastor and elders in a church. They are their own entity. And these things are being forced onto local churches. How are they forcing it onto local churches? Well, they're holding conferences about it, right? Gospel Coalition, ERLC, the Revoice Conference. I mean, so many of these conferences, boom, 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 boom. They're full of this stuff. And here's the other thing. You may have somebody at that conference that says something really good against it, but then you have other people that are saying things for it. I'll never forget, a few years ago, I was listening to one of the campus ministries. I can't remember which one it was. One of the campus ministries is a big meeting. They were in a massive convention hall. Had to be, I don't know, at least 1,000 people. There might have been way more. A woman got up and she spent her whole time, 45 minutes, excoriating white people. This is a Christian convention, and her whole time she was just putting down white people. All the white people in the room who had devoted their time to this ministry, to preaching Christ and Him crucified. And I was just like, what in the world? And if I can find that old information, I'll post that sometime too. But I know promises, right? Um, so I want to give you a few more boom in your face. This is where this stuff is popping up. Okay, you're going to have to do your own research. Understand that, please. This is a big topic, and it's everywhere. And there may be some things you say that I say that you agree with, some things that I say you disagree with, but you need to know why. Why do you agree? Why do you disagree? I've mentioned, the SBC and a number of the seminaries and their leaders are becoming infected with the whole critical race theory, intersectionality, social justice disease. And I want to talk about Al Mohler. Please know that I've enjoyed Al Mohler over the years. I've a number of things he's written and spoken about, but as I mentioned before, there's some big issues that keep popping up with him, and this one I'm going to tell you, I know was probably very inadvertent for Al, but it's indicative of what's going on at Southern. Also, something to note: almost every single one of the people that Al Mohler has put in place in seminaries, as the heads of seminaries, Russell Moore at the ERLC, and so on, they are full-on social justice warriors from one degree or another. And with Al, only time will tell. I know he has spoken outwardly against it, against the whole social justice movement, against the Marxism and all that stuff. But there's also some odd things with people that he's put in these places, things that he should have been aware of ahead of time. So on July 1st, here we go. On July 1st, 2019, Al Mohler tweeted a picture of the Southern's library and how proud he was of it. And in that picture, it shows the new academic arrivals section. And in the upper right-hand corner of the picture, it's kind of hard to see, but you can. I'll have this picture in there. You can see it. There's a book, and this book is by Rebecca McLaughlin. And the book's name, it's pink. It's kind of pink color. It's got dots, black and white dots on the front. It's called "Confronting Christianity: 12 Hard Questions for the World's Largest Religion." Now, Rebecca McLaughlin is a homosexual affirming feminist. She has same-sex lust in her own heart and mind, as she's admitted very openly, talks about it regularly. I want to just read something that she, at Together for the Gospel Conference, said in one of her talks. Okay? Now, these are things, so there's enough out there about Rebecca that anybody who is reviewing books, who is a conservative Christian, who holds to the biblical sexual ethic, right? And historical biblical sexual ethic, not the new biblical sexual ethic where, Al Berry and those guys are redefining it. Beth Moore is redefining it. They should have known. They should be aware. How big is the bookstore? It's not Lifeway. Lifeway is full of heresy, right? But this is a seminary's bookstore. They should be able to get right who they put in the bookstore. I'm just thinking, right? So in this talk at the Together for the Gospel Conference, and this article pointed me to this. This is on Medium.com, a Christian intellectual. Their claim is to restore the Christian intellectual life. But they point out, and you can go listen to her talk as well. She says, "For too long, we have let our siblings shiver in the dark." Now, by the way, she started this talk by reading from Harry Potter. She started this talk by saying how the world perceives Christianity as homophobic bigots. Okay? Listen to what she says. She says, "For too long, we have let our siblings shiver in the dark, feeling that they are weird and unwanted and unloved. Our churches must become places where same-sex attracted Christians are embraced and encouraged in their discipleship." Now, let me stop and say, as we're thinking about and dealing with same-sex attraction, right? We're talking about sin. Anytime we talk about lust, whether it's heterosexual lust, homosexual lust, whatever that is, we're talking about sin. But we've gone to this terminology of same-sex attracted, and they want to get away from the words sin. They want to get away from the words abomination. And when we lose our understanding of Christ, when we lose our understanding of us being under God's wrath, See John 3:36, right? See Ephesians 2. We are under the wrath of God because we are sinners. And that doesn't, or God's hatred of sin doesn't change just because we are saved. Just because Christ has pulled us out of our sin and saved our souls does not mean that God hates our sin any less. And so this same-sex attracted Christian terminology that's out there is often trying to whitewash, and I'm not saying every single one that uses it, but oftentimes it's trying to whitewash the sin, to whitewash the abomination that God sees and God talks about over and over and over again with sexual sin in the scriptures. Sorry, let me go back, read the whole quote. I'll stop. So she says, for too long we have let our siblings shiver in the dark, feeling that they are weird and unwanted and unloved. Our churches must become places where same-sex attracted Christians are embraced and encouraged in their discipleship. In fact, faithful, Christ-following, self-denying, same-sex attracted Christians in our churches are not an embarrassment. They are an asset. People are stopping their ears to the gospel because they think we're homophobic bigots. Again, the gospel divides. That's what it does. When people are confronted with their sin, they run. Unless Christ is calling them. Okay? She goes on. Same-sex attracted Christians are our God-given SWAT team to burst through those defenses. Do you hear what she's saying? Same-sex attracted Christians are our God-given SWAT team to burst through those defenses. I'm going to keep reading to finish the quote. We must repent of the way we have allowed racism to thrive in our churches. We must repent of the actual homophobia that has infected our thinking for years. So, feminists, woke, social justice, critical race theory, intersectionality, it's all wrapped up in this talk that she gives. And we just keep hearing and seeing this appeal to culture. The homophobic bigotry that is brought up is usually because pastors are calling this out as sin. I mean, there may be an occasional church that is just not handling this in a godly way. The Westboro Baptists. I mean, they're not. Maybe there's a church that's not dealing with this sin in the right way, but this is not the church. Not any church I know of, not any church I'm reading of, not any pastors that I'm listening to that I've heard and I try and listen broadly and read broadly. Just, what is she talking about? It's the same thing with racism. Oh, there must be racism. There must be racism. Well, if we're going to calling homosexuality sin, then if we're going to call that homophobic bigotry, then we have a real problem. We have a problem with the scriptures, and this is definitely not what Christ. This is not the Christian ethic that Christ is calling for. He's not calling for, hey, same-sex attracted people are the SWAT team to burst through those defenses of the culture. No, we preach Christ and Him crucified for the forgiveness of sins. Repentance will be granted to those that Christ is calling when the gospel is preached. We don't need to go out and figure out what the culture needs. We should be aware of what the culture is saying, what the culture is claiming, but we need to be standing firmly on the scriptures and in the ethic, in the love, in the truth speaking that the scriptures are teaching. Now, around this time, I'm almost done. Around this time, Al posted another picture, around the time Al posted this picture, a student at Southern took a picture of another book in the bookstore on the sales rack. Again, I would assume there's some board or group of people that screens the books. Just really, I mean, so this book is called Womanist Sass and Talkback. Womanist, Womanist, Sass and Talkback. And listen to what, so the author is Mitzi J. Smith. Listen to what she says. This is her and about the book and all this stuff. She says, Womanist Sass and Talkback is a contextual resistance text for readers interested in social justice. Smith raises our consciousness about pressing contemporary social injustice issues that impact communities of color in the larger society. Systemic or structural oppression and injustices, police profiling and brutality, oppressive pedagogy, and gendered violence are placed in dialogue with sacred texts or contexts. This book provides fresh intersectional readings of sacred texts that are accessible to both scholars and non-scholars. Womanist Sass and Talkback is for readers interested in critical interpretations of sacred texts, ancient and contemporary, and in propagating the justice and love of God while engaging those contexts. What in the world? This is Marxianity. This is critical race theory. This On her website, she states this: womanism or black feminism, some women prefer the latter self-designation, although they are not synonymous, has always concerned itself with intersectionality or with the destruction of interconnected forms of oppression that impact black women's lives and other women of color and their communities. Black women experience multiple forms of oppression simultaneously. Such oppressions include racism, sexism, and classism. She goes on and on. She says social justice for black women and their communities continues to be a struggle against interlocking forms of oppression because of the interrelated impact of race, gender, and class on black, brown, and yellow lives, and especially on the lives of women and children of color. Women of color who ignore race, gender, or class issues do so to the detriment of the larger community. If a black male focuses on race while ignoring or so she's knocking down his intersectionality points here. He's a black male, but if he focuses on race but then ignores these things, so he ignores participating in gender bias against black women, he is exercising his male privilege. So, I mean, full on, you're losing those points. If white women demand gender parity without regard for the impact of racial bias on black women, they exercise their privileged position as white women. When elite women of color focus on racial and gender bias without regard for the impact of classism on poor women, men, and children of any race, they are exercising class privilege. She labels herself as womanist New Testament scholar. This woman is not a follower of Christ if she's holding to these ideas. She's bought into Marxism full on. She's bought into Cohn's updating that Marxism into black liberation theology and the critical race theory and the intersectionality that denies the Christ of the Scriptures. Trying to keep these classifications in mind and adding up the points, it's dizzying at times. Basically, if you're not a cisgendered, white, heterosexual male, then you are being oppressed according to the followers of critical race theories. And the more categories you can figure out that you fit into, the more oppressed you are. And if you don't know what cisgendered means, that means that you identify as the gender that you were born with, right? So if you have male parts and you identify as a male, you are cisgendered, if I understand the definition correctly. Or if you have woman parts, you identify as a woman, then you are cisgendered. So give some definitions there, right? I pray, and I pray that you don't hear me saying that we don't worry about victims in our culture. I mean, if we find out that someone is, that somebody makes up a racist law, or that there are things that are holding people down, I don't care what color you are, I don't care if you're male, female, I don't care. Yeah, we can work to fix those things. I mean, but to claim that this is systemic in our culture right now is just absolute nonsense. There are no statistics that support this. And I'm gonna I think the Secular world, in many ways, has done a better job at tracking with this information and keeping this information alive. I think Ben Shapiro has done a great job with these statistics. I think PragerU has done a great job with bringing out the statistics, tearing apart the FBI statistics, looking at all these things, and where are these problems at that we're supposed to be just running pell-mell towards? So again, as a church, our mission is preaching Christ and Him crucified, right? And we stand up for the unborn, right? We stand up for against abortion. We call out sin. We call out sin in our own lives. We preach from the pulpit against sin, whatever variation that may be. We walk through the scriptures verse by verse, seeking to understand them in context, seeking to understand what God calls sin, seeking to understand the rules and ways that God has called us to live as believers in Christ. As we're thinking through critical race theory, we're looking at what's going on in the SBC Resolution 9, the acceptance of critical race theory and intersectionality as tools, analytical tools that supposedly can be used. We look at the books that are in Southern Seminary. And again, I realize I'm just giving you a few things. I realize that. But you're going to have to do the research yourself to verify what I'm saying. I'm trying to give you everything I can in little bits and pieces as often as I can. I can't do it all. But the idea is that it's creeping into the church, and we need to be aware of it. Obviously, it's in the culture around us. But we need to be able to understand, hey, this is here, and we have to deal with it. This is a cancer that has to be removed. It's not something that we can play patty cakes with. It is not something to be taken lightly. This is something that all of us have to be conversant on some level, unfortunately. And I just wanted to kind of bring it back around, dealing with the SBC's Resolution 9, dealing with some of the things we're seeing with Al Mohler and Russell Moore and the RLC, the Southern Seminaries. This is everywhere. I pray this has been informative, enlightening, and some people have asked how they can support us, and we're not a 501c3. We don't have anything that anybody can donate money to or anything, but we do have a little website we set up called AngryApeTees.com, AngryApeTees.com. And we got some fun T-shirts and stuff like that on there that we get a couple bucks off of if you buy those. So if you want, check those out. But anyways, my prayer is that you guys are, and that money, be used to help us with just technology. My phone right now is sitting on a stand that is literally falling apart. I had to push the pieces together, and I need to get a new one. But so it's little things like that we can utilize the money for. Anyways, I pray that you are seeking to learn more about Christ, to focus on Him, and seeking to serve your King. So go and serve your King. Have a great day.
If you're interested in learning more, preparing yourself better to witness, go to the website eternityatstake.com. We have several series on there. One of them is Maps from the Ancients. It covers manuscripts, archaeology, prophecy, science, and the resurrection. How do we know the Bible can be trusted? It's great for a homeschool study, great for a Sunday school class, great for an adult or teen class as well. We also have the Light Project, where I look at 8 cults and world religions, examining them. What do they do with God, with Christ, with the Bible, with salvation, heaven, hell, and things like that? Check it out today. Thanks for listening.